Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. Today's story is one of the more shocking stories about a Good Lawyers Gone Bad. It's the Michael Avenatti story. And I'm not quite sure why I found it as shocking as I did. Maybe it's because I knew the guy did bad stuff, but I didn't quite know what he did. So when I actually dove down into the research and saw what occurred, I guess it just kind of got to me. This episode's going to be a little bit longer than some of the other ones because the story really goes on and on and on. So buckle in. And if you like it, then don't forget to go ahead and follow us or rate us or leave a nice comment for us. It really does help the podcast. I have two disclaimers that I'm going to give you before I tell the story. First of all, later on, I'm going to talk about the shoe company Nike, and I may call it Nike or Nike. I don't know which one it goes by. I kind of use both of them interchangeably. It depends on how it comes out of my mouth. And I'm just telling you, I know there's going to be that inconsistency. The other thing is I want to say that everything I'm going to talk about is alleged. I'm going to give you just that disclaimer once. Most of the stuff that I talk about and most of the facts that I use came from the indictments and the documents that were created by prosecutors in the state. And I'm not going to, every time I say one of those facts, I'm not going to say it was alleged that he did this, it was alleged that he did that. I'm just going to say he did this and did that. And I'm getting all of my information from the indictments. So I just want to give this one blanket disclaimer that everything I say is alleged. All right? So there you go. So either get comfortable or put on your walking shoes and get on the elliptical for a long time or go outside for a walk or drift off into sleep. Oh, should I start to do a meditation podcast? Today we're going to have the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. Maybe we can help you drift off to sleep. No, sorry, I'm much too high-strung to do that. Enjoy the Michael Avenatti story. The Ferrari skidded around the corner with such force that the tires on the right side lifted off the ground slightly. When all four wheels returned to the track, the driver peeked in his rearview mirror. He didn't see anyone. Even though he knew his way around these French roads, he was still uncomfortable because it was the middle of the night and he just might not be able to see the people that were in pursuit. He jerked the wheel to the left, flying through another corner, nearly sliding out of control once again. His head instinctively checked the rear view again. Still no one. He's lucky his eyes returned to the road quickly. He was almost on top of a much slower car up ahead. The driver downshifted the Ferrari violently, yanked the wheel to the left, gunned the engine, and blew past the slower vehicle like it was standing still. This time when he checked the rearview mirror, all he saw was distance growing between him and that slower car. The fatigue was setting in. Actually, it started to set in about an hour ago. But the driver was expecting it. In fact, he'd been training for it. Michael Avenatti was 2 hours into his shift of driving for a race team that was competing in what might be the most famous automobile race in the world, the 24-hour race known as Le Mans. The 24 Hours of Le Mans is motorsport's ultimate endurance test. Teams of drivers take turns racing specially built cars around a circuit in France for exactly 24 hours straight. The race has been running since 1923, and it's legendary because it's not about pure speed, but about surviving mechanical failures, crashes, and exhaustion, all while maintaining pace throughout day and night. To some, driving for hours throughout the night, taking cat naps while your teammate takes the wheel for a few hours, and then getting back behind the wheel, well, that would all be a grueling hell. To Michael Avenatti, it was a grueling dream come true. The streets in Le Mans, France were a long way away from the small racetrack in Colorado where Michael Avenatti was first bit by the racing bug. Avenatti remembered being 9 years old and standing on the side of a gravel road with his father, watching the Pikes Peak hill climb in Colorado Springs. It's his first memory of going to a race, and it seems to have been the moment that two important parts of his life were forged. First, Avenatti developed a love of racing. Second, and far more damaging, Michael Avenatti developed a taste for adrenaline. Michael Avenatti moved around as a kid. He left the grassy fields of Colorado, went to sunny California, and then after high school, he found himself in college amongst the ivy-covered walls of the University of Pennsylvania. After graduating from Penn in 1996, he moved to Washington, D.C. and enrolled in law school at George Washington University. He attended classes at night and worked during the day. During those formative school years in both Philly and D.C., Avenatti worked for an outfit called the Research Group, a company that did opposition research for political campaigns. That job had to be a rush. The world of political campaigning is volatile and contentious. And opposition research is all about digging up dirt, which means that the entire effort was probably just nasty. Avenatti was surely getting an interesting education on fighting in the trenches. And to make it even more exciting, the people he worked with were burgeoning political celebrities. The company was founded by a man that would go on to be one of the most significant players in Democratic politics, a guy named Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel would eventually become the chief of staff for President Barack Obama and the mayor of Chicago. Well, adrenaline and celebrities are a volatile cocktail, and Michael Avenatti was doing shots. Michael Avenatti was developing a sense of personal intensity at this time. He was quoted in George Washington Law School's magazine as once saying, "Life is meant to be lived. There are no dress rehearsals." A bit dramatic, but it seems he believed it. He was also developing a reputation. A former law school professor once called Avenatti an adrenaline junkie. That professor told the Washington Post, "I think he needs that adrenaline rush. He lives his life aggressively. In both litigation and in life, he showed a certain aggressive style." It was during that time that Avenatti's relentless determination to succeed was set in his personality. It showed in every aspect of his life. In his personal life, Avenatti was racing fast cars. In his work life, he was tirelessly pursuing the rough-and-tumble world of politics. He worked on nearly 150 campaigns in 42 different states while working at the Research Group. And in his school life, he was kicking ass. When Avenatti finished George Washington University School of Law, he would graduate first in his class. But there was one particular experience that Avenatti would have during those professionally formative years that would solidify what might eventually be called the Avenatti approach to lawyering. And that experience was found inside a can of cola. When I'm not writing podcast episodes, I teach continuing legal education to lawyers. I travel around the country giving ethics CLEs that are entertaining and substantive. When a bar association or law firm brings me out to speak, they put me up in a hotel where the event is being held. So what ends up happening is that I never get to choose where I stay. I just go where they tell me to go. Of course, when I check into the hotel, I always give my loyalty rewards number for that hotel chain, and it's always a different brand of hotel. So what that ultimately means is that I have enough points in every single hotel brand to entitle me to absolutely nothing. In 1995, 20-year-old college student John Leonard took the exact opposite approach to the whole rewards points thing. He showed his loyalty to one brand. But it wasn't a hotel, and there was an ulterior motive. John Leonard wasn't trying to win a free hotel stay or a sandwich at a local bagel place. John Leonard was trying to win a fighter jet. Yeah, a military fighter jet, an actual British-made Harrier jet. You know the Harrier. That's the first fighter plane that took off by just rising straight up. You must have seen him on TV or something. In 1995, the soda company Pepsi had a marketing campaign called Drink Pepsi, Get Stuff. Just like all rewards programs, you bought the product, you collected points, and you could redeem those points for prizes. Well, the main prize in this contest was a $32 million Harrier jet. The ads for the game said that if you can collect 7 million points, you could get the fighter jet. It was a joke. It was a gag. Pepsi was just messing around. But John Leonard didn't think it was a gag. In fact, when Leonard looked into the contest rules, he found something interesting. The rules for the game said that you could purchase the Pepsi points for 10 cents apiece. You didn't just have to actually buy the product. You could purchase the rewards points. Well, Leonard did the math. 7 million points would be $700,000. $700,000 would get you an aircraft worth $32 million. That's a pretty good investment. Well, when he mentioned that to an investor friend of his, that friend agreed. So together, John Leonard and his friend Todd Hoffman sent 15 Pepsi points and a check for $700,000 to Pepsi, and they asked if they could please redeem their prize. Pepsi got a good chuckle out of all of that. They sent back Leonard's check along with a few coupons and said something like, "Nice try, kid, but that whole Harrier thing was just a joke." John Leonard, however, was not laughing. He told them, "I get that you think it's just a gag, but there's nothing in your rules that says it's a joke." And he was right. There were no disclaimers saying that the Harrier jet grand prize was a joke. There was no fine print about the 7 million points. So John Leonard demanded that Pepsi give him the fighter jet. Things, as you can imagine, got messy, and I'm sure you're not surprised to learn that it all turned into a lawsuit. The lawsuit made the national news, of course. It was a David versus Goliath story, but it had a little bit of an interesting twist because it was Pepsi who ended up suing the 20-year-old John Leonard. Well, he may have been young, but he was tenacious. And throughout the lawsuit, John Leonard stuck to his guns. He wanted that fighter jet, and he felt that he was entitled to it as a matter of law. Leonard's investor/partner, Todd Hoffman, agreed. But as we all know, sometimes having the law on your side isn't enough to prevail. Winning a lawsuit can sometimes be part legal work and part media relations. And that's particularly true if you're hoping to settle with a large company that wants to protect its brand image. That is why Leonard's lawyer recommended that he consider bringing on another team member. The lawyer knew a young law student who seemed to be quite media savvy and was an assertive, confident guy. The young man's name was Michael Avenatti. Avenatti joined the litigation team as a media consultant. The approach that Avenatti would recommend would give amazing insight to his philosophy about lawyering in general. It was an incredible early glimpse into an approach that would define his career. And in the Pepsi case, it also happened to drive a wedge between his clients. 20-year-old John Leonard didn't want to make a public spectacle of the case. He just wanted his fighter jet. But Avenatti convinced him that the only way he could get what he wanted is if he went scorched earth. They had to go after Pepsi hard in the media. Avenatti believed that they had to publicize Pepsi's refusal to honor that prize offer. According to the source Media Post, Avenatti proceeded to dig up dirt on Pepsi and planned to launch a massive anti-Pepsi PR campaign that would blast the message, "Pepsi, deceiving a generation." The more naive John Leonard seemed to be giving Avenatti some leeway, but his older, more experienced investor partner, Todd Hoffman, he wasn't so into it. Hoffman apparently considered that threatening Pepsi with that mudslinging campaign was akin to blackmail. Leonard and Hoffman eventually ditched the controversial approach recommended by Avenatti and pursued a more conventional legal route, fighting the case in court. Unfortunately for the duo, they lost. In the end, the court ruled in favor of Pepsi, holding that the advertisement was an obvious joke. The court held that the opportunity to win the jet never appeared in writing, and that the ad was otherwise not a contractually binding offer as a matter of law. But Michael Avenatti got his first exposure to real-life lawyering. Sure, he wasn't yet a member of the bar, but he was in an advisory capacity that was super close to being a legal advisor. And that experience in the Pepsi case seems to have forged his professional personality. To Michael Avenatti, lawyering seemed to be all about fighting dirty. At least some people around him sensed that Avenatti developed somewhat of a warped philosophy, That investor partner, Todd Hoffman, he didn't mince words when he remembered the way Avenatti behaved during the Pepsi case. Hoffman said that Avenatti steps over the line as a human being. Hoffman could not possibly have known just how right on his instincts would prove to be. Michael Avenatti's career trajectory took the expected route for a guy who had dreams of big piles of money and big, powerful clients. He went into big law. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term big law, it refers to the largest, most prestigious law firms in the world that typically employ hundreds or thousands of attorneys. They handle high-stakes, sophisticated matters and are known for extremely demanding work environments. And yes, it is super demanding. But there's a trade-off. In return for what sometimes feels like selling your soul to the big law machine, well, you're rewarded with a boatload of money. Avenatti took a job with one of those powerhouse law firms named O'Melveny and Myers. He was going to work in their office that was located where the powerful people were found, Los Angeles. The firm was the perfect place to be for a lawyer who had dreams of swimming in celebrity waters. It seemed like a perfect setup for Avenatti. He worked under one of the partners who represented a ton of celebrities. He got to assist on high-profile cases for clients like singer Christina Aguilera. He also worked extensively for Don Henley and Glenn Frey of the rock band The Eagles, including a well-publicized suit that was brought by one of their former bandmates. But Michael Avenatti was apparently unhappy. I don't know, maybe it wasn't so much unhappy as it was uncomfortable. You see, he seemed to feel a little stifled at O'Melveny. There's a particular character trait that you find in most successful big law partners. Being a top partner in big law requires a strange combination of humility and confidence. Celebrity clients want the most qualified lawyers, but they also expect them to be sophisticated and civilized. I mean, listen, the clients want their lawyers to be assertive, maybe even at times aggressive, but they expect that aggressiveness to be presented with a touch of class. What that means, though, is that if you see yourself as a lawyer who's a stone-cold killer, you figure out pretty quickly that you don't exactly mesh with the big law approach of quiet dignity. For Michael Avenatti, I'm not so sure that he had a hard time handling the dignity part, but that quiet part was a problem for sure. Avenatti was bold and brash, and he had one gear: go. Not only was he probably put off by the need to present a more subdued image, but the type of work the big law firm preferred was also probably a drag. Sure, he got to work on celebrity cases, but O'Melveny was mostly known for being a defense firm. Even the celebrity cases that Avenatti worked on seemed to have been the types of cases where someone else sued the firm's client. As an associate in O'Melveny, Avenatti was probably forced to constantly hold up a shield when what he really wanted to do was brandish a sword. And that's why he must have felt as if he were being smothered by a pillow while working at the firm. Michael Avenatti raced hard, and he took chances. He wanted his legal practice to have the same intensity. And that's why, after only a few years of working in big law, Avenatti took a trip to Las Vegas. Summer in Las Vegas can be unbearably hot. Have you ever been there in the summer? It's like walking in an oven. So it's not the place you'd expect people to be walking around in a suit and tie, even if that outfit was Armani. Unless, of course, you were at a particular meeting being held in August of 2004 where you wouldn't be caught dead in anything other than an Armani suit. This was the annual meeting of the Los Angeles chapter of the Consumer Trial Attorneys Association. The name of the group sounds bland. Consumer Trial Attorneys? Sounds like a bunch of lawyers who sue Walmart or Target. Well, it is. But don't kid yourself. There's big money in those kinds of cases. If you were walking the floor at that meeting, there's a good chance you belong to a law firm that's won multi-million-dollar judgments. And yes, I used the plural there. multi-million-dollar judgments. If you were there at that meeting, you were probably part of a firm that won those kinds of huge cases, and you were looking to show off your stuff to your colleagues. Michael Avenatti was walking the floor at that meeting, but he wasn't one of the lawyers who won the big judgments. He wanted to be one of those lawyers. Avenatti made the 4-hour drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas because he was ready to switch sides from defense to offense. Michael Avenatti wanted to be a plaintiff's lawyer. Being a plaintiff's lawyer was far more Michael Avenatti's style. When you're suing on behalf of an injured client, you're pursuing. You're aggressively building your case to crush the opposition and extract maximum compensation for those who wronged your client. It's exactly the kind of work that would appeal to someone who raced cars, chased money, and chased the spotlight. Avenatti wasn't walking that convention floor aimlessly. He was on the hunt. He needed to make a particular connection. The prize Avenatti was trying to bag was a job with the firm Green, Broylett and Wheeler. Why that firm in particular? Gee, I don't know. Maybe it was the fact that they won billion-dollar judgments. Yeah, with a B, billion-dollar judgments. They were a firm who built a strong reputation for handling some of the most challenging, catastrophic, and serious injury cases in the country. And if Michael Avenatti wanted to swing a sword as a plaintiff's lawyer, that was the crew to be with. The only problem is that everybody who wanted to be a plaintiff's lawyer wanted a job with Green, Broylett and Wheeler. The law firm got hundreds of resumes a year from aspiring associates, but they barely hired any. They ran a small ship of outstanding lawyers. And while Avenatti's big law employer O'Melveny had over 800 lawyers across the globe, Green, Broylett, and Wheeler had a whopping 14. By the way, divide billions of dollars over 14 lawyers. Yeah, that's why everybody wanted to work there. Avenatti scoured the room looking for the firm's namesake partner, Bruce Broylett. He surely knew that the only way to make himself rise above the pack of lawyers shooting for a job at that firm was to schmooze the main guy. Well, he found him, and Avenatti poured on the charm. He cornered Broylett for 45 minutes, doing everything possible to make his personality shine. He was passionate, intelligent, and he showed that he was driven. And it worked. Bruce Broylett remembers seeing a lot of himself in the young gunslinger. He thought Avenatti had a wonderful demeanor and a great presence. It got Avenatti an interview with the firm. And over the next 5 months, Michael Avenatti interviewed with the firm 4 times. Eventually, he landed the job. Michael Avenatti was a rock star at Green, Broylett and Wheeler. He got a chance to represent some interesting clients as well. He represented diamond heiress Zeta Graf in a defamation case against Paris Hilton. On the eve of trial, they settled for $10 million. And in what would be the first run-in he'd have with the future president of the United States, Avenatti led a client in a successful lawsuit relating to the TV show The Apprentice. But maybe the flashiest case he worked on is one that seemed the most boring. Not so much because of the content, but because of the stunt he pulled. Avenatti represented a company named Cast Art that manufactured different gifts like casted figurines and snow globes, that sort of thing. His client claimed that its business was destroyed by the big accounting firm KPMG. They claimed that KPMG was negligent. KPMG didn't agree, and their lawyer made a bold claim during their trial. In their opening statements, KPMG's lawyers told the jury that Avenatti's client would have gone out of business no matter what KPMG did. They basically said, listen, it doesn't matter what we did. All of Cast Art's competitors have already gone out of business, and it was just a matter of time until Cast Art went the way of the dodo as well. In other words, it doesn't matter if you find us negligent. Cast Art was part of a dying industry, so we should not be held liable. That's when Michael Avenatti did something that was movie-level kind of stuff. Avenatti stood in front of the jury and took out his cell phone. While standing there in the courtroom, he put the phone on speaker and dialed the telephone numbers for each of Cast Art's competitors. One after another, the company representatives answered the phone. and it proved that they were all still in business. The jury heard each one of them answer the phone in real time. Avenatti won a $31.8 million verdict. Michael Avenatti had it all. He was an associate at one of the most successful plaintiffs' firms in the world. He had the respect of his peers. The prestigious magazine from the American Bar Association known as the ABA Journal, it did a whole write-up on him. His alma mater, George Washington University School of Law, they named an award after him. Each year, a graduating member of the JD class was given the Michael J. Avenatti Award for Excellence in Pretrial and Trial Advocacy. His personal life was going great, too. He had a growing family with 2 young, beautiful daughters. And he was excelling on the racetrack. He was no longer an amateur race car driver. He became a professional. His race team was named GB Autosport, and Avenatti piloted a Porsche 997 on the American Le Mans circuit. He also even got a chance to race at Daytona International Speedway. What Michael Avenatti should have done at that point was nothing. Nothing. He should have done nothing different. He should have just kept on doing what he was doing. But when you're an adrenaline junkie, you need to constantly chase that next high. So instead of staying on the safe path toward increased success, Michael Avenatti took a different path. One that was fraught with risk and uncertainty. "2008 was the second scariest year of my life. Maybe one day I'll tell you about the scariest year of my life, but not today. Today we're going to talk about the second scariest year of my life. I was in-house counsel for a real estate developer, and things were going swimmingly. Houses were selling, deals were being made, and things were looking good. I remember we were trying to start a new project, and we were looking for financing. The mood around the office was decidedly upbeat when we got a term sheet from Lehman Brothers indicating that they were interested in financing the project. Now, look, if you're in the industry, then you know a term sheet doesn't obligate a bank to lend any money. It's just the bank basically saying, okay, this deal is worth our consideration. Let's talk more. And then, about a week later, Lehman Brothers went belly up. The real estate market came to a grinding halt, and business dried up overnight. Existing loans were called, and the industry was just instantaneously decimated. And then the entire economy imploded, and the Great Recession had begun. Everyone was hurting, including lawyers. I remember the guy who lived across the street from me at the time was a partner in the commercial real estate department of a huge law firm. One day, the law firm just closed their entire commercial real estate department. Partners, associates, support staff, all of it. They just lopped it off, fired everyone, and eliminated the department. It was incredible. This is the time when Michael Avenatti decided to start his own firm in Los Angeles, California. I don't think he could have chosen a worse time to go out on his own. Avenatti was starting his own plaintiff's firm, and there's a unique problem with being a plaintiff's lawyer, and it has to do with how you get paid. When you're a plaintiff's lawyer, you get paid on a contingency fee basis. Your fee is a portion of the amount you win for a client or a portion of the settlement if the case settles before trial. It's lucrative because when you win big, you get paid big. The problem is you only get paid when you win or settle. The old saying when it comes to being a plaintiff's lawyer is you eat what you kill. But if you don't kill, you don't eat. And when you don't eat, you start to starve, and that's when you start to get desperate. I don't know if the Great Recession of 2008 hurt Michael Avenatti's new law firm, but it's a good bet that it did. By the time 2010 came along, the entire economy was in the throes of the Great Recession, and Avenatti's firm was struggling big time. And here's how we can tell. In 2009, Avenatti's tax returns showed that he earned a total income of almost $2 million. The next year, he made a little more than $1.15 million. He owed the government a total of $850,000 in taxes for those years. But when he filed his returns, he didn't pay the taxes. The only reasonable explanation for why that happened is that he didn't have the money to pay the tax bill. And it wasn't too long after that Michael Avenatti stopped filing tax returns altogether. Avenatti appears to have been in a big financial hole. But adrenaline junkies, they don't remain stagnant. If they're down, they get up. They search relentlessly for a road out of their predicament. And when they find it, they hop in their vehicle and they take it. The problem is, sometimes they have to run over a few people in the process. On April 29, 2011, Los Angeles police found Jeffrey Johnson in the middle of the street, naked, praying to God. He was brought to an emergency psychiatric unit, but he wasn't there long. Allegedly, he pushed a doctor, and as a result, he was arrested and sent to jail. At the jail, Johnson became suicidal. One day, a deputy let him out of his cell for breakfast. Johnson walked to the top of the stairs and climbed onto the railing. He straightened his arms like he was about to dive into a swimming pool, and he lunged head first. When he woke up, he couldn't feel anything from the waist down. Johnson hired Michael Avenatti to represent him in a suit against Los Angeles County. It was a good case. There was a lot of evidence that showed that officials ignored the warning signs that Johnson was suicidal and that they didn't take proper steps to prevent him from hurting himself. Johnson was a paraplegic for life as a result. If Avenatti was able to win big for Johnson, there would be a big payday for the lawyer. It would help him and his struggling firm. But remember, you don't get paid in plaintiffs' cases until the case settles or you win. So those cases take time to work their way through the courts and to come to a conclusion. So while Avenatti was working on Jeffrey Johnson's case, he got involved in some other ventures. Avenatti was attracted to the rich and famous, and he was enamored with auto racing. So it shouldn't be a surprise that he formed a relationship with Dr. McDreamy. Yeah, actor Patrick Dempsey. Patrick Dempsey is also a well-known auto racer and a popular member of the Hollywood elite, so it makes sense that he and Avenatti would cross paths. Well, the two did more than cross paths. They went into business together. In 2013, Avenatti bought a chain of coffee shops named Tully's Coffee. The Seattle coffee chain had just recently filed for bankruptcy protection, and that made it a potential target for someone looking for a deal. So Avenatti made a deal with his buddy Patrick Dempsey. Avenatti would finance the deal, run the business, and Dempsey would basically provide his star power for marketing purposes. The coffee shop would also sponsor their racing adventures. It was perfect. Avenatti bought the company, and Tully's sponsored the race car that would be a joint effort between Dempsey Racing and Avenatti's GB Autosport. It was called the Coffee Rocket. But it wasn't very long before Dempsey wanted out. Dempsey claimed that Avenatti hadn't fully financed the coffee chain as he promised. Dempsey said that instead of putting cash into the business, Avenatti borrowed against Tully's assets. Listen, it makes sense to us, right? If he didn't have the money to pay his income taxes, he's not going to have the money to invest in a string of coffee shops. Well, McDreamy went to McCourt and sued Avenatti, and very quickly he was McGone out of the partnership. Tully's was now Avenatti's headache alone. Rather than digging himself out of the financial hole, though, it seems that Avenatti dug himself down even deeper. He had a coffee business that was sucking cash, and he had a law practice that was doing the same. Cases like the Jeffrey Johnson matter against L.A. County would help, but they wouldn't create fees until they either tried or settled. He needed an infusion of capital. He got it by going deeper into debt. In 2014, Avenatti made application for a couple of loans from an outfit named People's Bank. All of his ventures were thirsty for cash, so he borrowed $850,000 for his race team, GB Autosport, and $2.75 million for his law firm. Now, if you're following this story, you're probably wondering something. How the hell could Avenatti convince a bank to give him so much money in loans when his financial situation was so perilous? The income from his legal fees seemed to be reducing year after year. He didn't have enough money to pay his income taxes. He borrowed against the coffee shop, so there probably wasn't equity there. How could he get a bank to give him another $3.5 million in loans? It was easy. He lied to them. Michael Avenatti provided fraudulent financial information to the bank when he applied for those loans. He gave the bank fake personal tax returns. Those fake returns said that he made millions more than he actually made. He submitted fake financial statements that left off hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt that he owed to places like the IRS. He submitted balance sheets claiming that he had $500,000 in his business account when he had a little bit over 40 grand. He also wildly overstated his business income by millions of dollars. Oh, Avenatti was in deep now. He crossed the line. Before, he was struggling financially. Now, he had engaged in fraud. He was in a tight spot without many options. In fact, there was really only one option as he saw it. Now, if you think I'm going to say that the choice was to come clean, well, you're living in a McDream world. What Michael Avenatti chose to do was basically turn his entire professional life into a giant pyramid scheme. It started in earnest when the case for his paraplegic client, Jeffrey Johnson, was settled. Michael Avenatti hit pay dirt in the Jeffrey Johnson matter. Like I said, the evidence was pretty clear that the authorities didn't take the proper steps to prevent him from attempting suicide. It doesn't look like it took a whole lot of effort to convince Los Angeles County to settle the case. In January of 2015, LA County agreed to pay Jeffrey Johnson $4 million. Now remember, as a plaintiff's lawyer, Avenatti gets paid a contingency fee. So if he was entitled to a third of that settlement, Avenatti would be looking at a legal fee of around $1.3 million. Not bad, but not that good either. Avenatti's businesses appear to have been hemorrhaging money. $1.3 million was probably not going to make everything better. So Avenatti put together a plan. He told the client that the settlement had to remain confidential. The client couldn't talk about it to anyone. He also told Johnson that LA County couldn't pay the $4 million in one lump sum. It had to be paid out over time. Oh, and it also couldn't be paid until LA County approved what was called a special needs trust. Once that trust was established for Johnson, the county would pay the settlement proceeds into that trust. It was all a lie. But why? Why set up such elaborate hoops? The reason is that that was the only way Avenatti could get away with stealing his client's money. LA County paid the entire $4 million settlement on January 26, 2015. Avenatti had the whole thing deposited into his trust account. He never told Johnson that he received that money, and then he just took it. Some of it went into his personal accounts, some of it went into the business account for his race team GB Autosport, and some went to pay his personal expenses. By July, Avenatti had spent all of it. The entire settlement was gone. Now, Avenatti knew that he couldn't get away with giving his client nothing. He needed to keep him quiet so he didn't kick up dirt and eventually figure out what was going on. So starting in July of 2015, Avenatti paid his client about $2,000 a month. He told the client that they were advances against the settlement that was going to eventually come. Now you see why he created that garbage trust idea. He needed a way to explain to the client why he had not yet received the money. The county's got to approve the trust before they can pay. So as long as the trust isn't yet approved, they haven't yet paid. Meanwhile, Avenatti is now living off the $4 million settlement that he stole from Jeffrey Johnson. And he needed that money because he had a ton of personal expenses, including the cost of what was probably an awesome home in Laguna Beach, California. He seems to have had so many expenses that the $4 million he stole from Jeffrey Johnson wasn't even enough. So he dipped into the coffee business. He took money from Tully's and he also used that to pay his personal expenses. He also used money from Tully's to pay the installments that he was giving to Jeffrey Johnson. Meanwhile, that sapped the coffee shops of so much cash that they didn't have the money to make their quarterly employment tax payments. So Avenatti stopped paying those taxes too. But here's the thing about taxes. When you don't pay them, eventually Uncle Sam comes knocking. And for Avenatti, it turned out to be a double banger. Not only did the IRS come after Tully's for not paying employment taxes, but remember those loans he got from People's Bank? Well, the fake tax returns that Avenatti gave to People's Bank were different from the returns that he sent into the government when he filed his taxes. Somehow that got flagged, and the IRS wanted to know what was going on. It was finally time for Avenatti to come clean. Just kidding. He didn't come clean. He tried to get out of it by lying to the IRS. He told the feds he had nothing to do with Tully's finances, and he had no idea why they weren't paying their employment taxes. And then, when the IRS put liens on all of Tully's bank accounts, Avenatti just opened up new accounts. Then he started to use a different company name to do business. At one point, he told a Tully's employee to stop depositing the coffee company money into their normal accounts and instead to deposit Tully's money into an account owned by his race team, GB Autosports. Was that because the racing company needed the money? Probably not. He was probably trying to hide it from the IRS. You see, if the IRS has a lien on a bank account, the bank is going to turn over whatever money ends up in that account. So, someone who's got a bank account with a lien on it might be tempted to put that money elsewhere. Avenatti had the coffee guys deposit almost $1 million into the alternate accounts. Avenatti did whatever he had to do to buy time and keep everything afloat. And if you thought that he'd run out of money and get caught, you'd be wrong. And that's because he had more clients. And they were about to come into some money too. In January of 2017, Avenatti represented Alexis Gardner, the ex-girlfriend of NBA player Hassan Whiteside. Avenatti negotiated a $3 million separation settlement for Alexis. The deal was that the ball player would make an initial payment of $2.75 million right away and then pay the final $250,000 3 years later. Total of $3 million. But that's not the deal that Avenatti told to his client. He told Alexis that the ball player would make a smaller initial payment. That payment, he said, was to cover Avenatti's legal fee. And then the ball player would make monthly payments to Alexis over the next 8 years. Alexis fell for it. How could she not? She trusted her lawyer. He told her it was a good deal. Of course she would buy it. When the initial $2.75 million payment was made, Avenatti took it. He took it all. He took all that money because he needed it for something critical. I think we could all agree that there are times when someone steals money and we can empathize, right? I mean, maybe someone needs to steal food to eat. We might not approve of the theft, but we could understand why they did it. In Michael Avenatti's case, one might be tempted to think that his bad acts were done because he too was struggling just to make ends meet. But you might reconsider that idea when you realize that he spent $2.5 million of Alexis Gardner's money on a private plane. Yeah, that's what happened. He transferred $2.5 million of that money from his trust account and gave it to the Honda Aircraft Company and purchased a private plane. He then took the remaining $250,000, put it into one of his other accounts, and used that to make the monthly payments to Alexis. He told her that those were the monthly settlement payments that he negotiated from the ball player as part of the deal. I wasn't kidding about the pyramid scheme, was I? I mean, that's what it was. He would steal his client's money up front, and then to keep each of them quiet, he'd pay them out over time. He'd use the money that he stole from one client to make the payments he promised to the other clients, and he'd also use those funds to pay his own bills. He did it to multiple clients. In another case, Avenatti made a deal to settle a matter on behalf of a client for a lump sum. The other party agreed to make an immediate payment of $1.6 million. The other lawyer sent over the settlement agreement and told Avenatti to have his client countersign it and send it back. But Avenatti wanted to take that money. So instead of giving the settlement agreement to his client, Avenatti wrote a fake settlement agreement which said that the payments would be made over time. He then took the signature page, just the page with the signature blocks on it. He took the signature page from the legitimate agreement that was prepared by the other lawyer. He attached that signature page to the fake agreement that he wrote, and then he gave the fake agreement to his client to review and sign. The client signed the signature page. Avenatti then pulled the signature page off the fake agreement, reattached it to the actual legitimate agreement, and emailed that over to the other lawyer. To the other lawyer, everything looked kosher. So he transferred the $1.6 million to Avenatti's trust account. Avenatti then used that money to keep the Tully's Coffee Company afloat and make the installment payments to his other clients. Of the $1.6 million in proceeds, Avenatti stole all but $600. Now, sometimes one of these clients would make a little noise, but Avenatti knew how to handle them. And the method he used was worse than callous. It was downright mean. Consider what he did to his paraplegic client, Jeffrey Johnson. In 2017, Johnson wanted to buy a house. Avenatti told him that he thought it was a great idea. Meanwhile, Johnson, as far as he knows, did not get his settlement yet. Avenatti confirmed once LA County created that trust and they funded the settlement, he could use those monies to buy the house. Johnson, of course, didn't know that the settlement funds were long gone, but Avenatti let him proceed anyway. The client went through the entire transaction all the way up until the closing, and right before the sale was going to be completed, Avenatti pulled the plug. He told Johnson that because LA County had not yet approved that bogus special needs trust, he couldn't buy the house. And he didn't. Avenatti was robbing Peter to pay Paul. And while all of that was going on, the client who would truly make Michael Avenatti a household name walked in his office door. In July 2006, Stephanie Clifford attended a celebrity golf tournament in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. She was surely wowed by the attendees. I mean, who wouldn't be? Of course, Stephanie was a bit of a minor celebrity herself, though you probably wouldn't recognize her by her given name. You wouldn't necessarily know Stephanie Clifford, but you might recognize her stage name, Stormy Daniels. It was at this golf tournament that Stormy Daniels, adult film star, met Donald Trump, well-known businessman. Stormy says that the pair went back to her room and had sex. Donald Trump denies it. For a long time, it didn't matter. No one cared. It was a meeting between two semi-celebrities that really didn't warrant much press attention. That changed, of course, when businessman Donald Trump became presidential candidate Donald Trump. In October 2016, just before the Trump-Clinton election, the infamous Access Hollywood tape emerged where Donald Trump was recorded making the crude grab her by the you-know-what statement. The tape sent Trump's campaign into crisis mode. During this chaotic period, Stormy Daniels apparently saw an opportunity. She contacted her attorney, Keith Davidson, and began shopping her story about Trump to media outlets, including the National Enquirer. She threatened to go public with detailed accounts of the alleged affair and the intimate communication she claimed to have had with Trump afterwards. But Trump had a fixer on his team, a lawyer named Michael Cohen. Cohen was Trump's longtime personal attorney, and it was his job to take care of problems like the Stormy Daniels story. So that's what he did. Cohen bought Stormy Daniels' story with the intention of burying it. He did that by agreeing to pay Stormy $130,000 for her story in return for a non-disclosure agreement. The offer was negotiated with Daniels through her attorney at the time, Keith Davidson. A deal was struck on October 27, 2016, just 11 days before the election. Daniels got the money and remained silent for a little more than a year. But then, In February of 2018, she had a change of heart. Stormy Daniels was apparently feeling frustrated by the deal she made. She started to question whether she should stay silent about the alleged affair. Of course, there was that pesky confidentiality agreement that required her to do so. But when Stormy got to thinking about it, she wondered whether the agreement was actually valid. She felt that way because Donald Trump never actually signed the agreement. So she decided to try to invalidate the NDA. Daniels needed someone willing to take on Donald Trump directly, something that would require both legal skill and media savvy. She needed someone who would thrive under the scrutiny of the press. She wasn't looking for someone who would approach the case as a quiet contract dispute, file some papers and try to settle it out of court. She wanted a bold, brash, and bright fighter. So she got Michael Avenatti. If Michael Avenatti were to have developed the perfect case in a laboratory, it would probably have been this Stormy Daniels matter. It had everything he could ever want. He would be in the public eye. He would be fighting against a Republican. Remember, all those years ago, Avenatti worked for an opposition campaign consultant that was affiliated with the Democratic Party. On top of all that, he'd be up against Donald Trump. There wasn't a bigger name in the world at the time. Avenatti agreed to represent Daniels, and he immediately went on the offensive. Rather than simply filing a quiet lawsuit to void the NDA, he launched a full-scale media blitz. He appeared on cable news shows, he held press conferences, and he used Twitter to taunt Trump directly. His strategy was to use the courts and the media simultaneously, keeping the story in headlines while also pursuing legal remedies. The case gave Avenatti exactly what he was looking for: a national platform and the chance to position himself as Trump's legal nemesis. For a brief period, he became one of the most recognizable attorneys in the entire country. He appeared on news shows almost daily, and he amassed hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers. And the press, they loved him. Actually, I think that's a gross understatement. I think the press had a crush on Michael Avenatti. The media's treatment of Michael Avenatti during the height of the Stormy Daniels case in 2018 has got to be one of the more embarrassing episodes of recent political journalism. Cable news networks gave Avenatti an almost unprecedented platform. CNN alone booked him over 100 times in a matter of months. Anchors and pundits breathlessly covered every single press conference and every tweet that he made. When you read the articles that reporters wrote, it was incredible. They marveled at his chiseled jaw and how he finished fights that other people start. Time magazine even quoted Rick Wilson, who is a Trump-loathing GOP consultant and author, and he said Avenatti's got balls. Giant, clanking titanium balls. Meanwhile, at the exact time the press was anointing Avenatti as their savior, he was stealing millions of dollars from clients in the most heinous way imaginable. Talk about misreading someone's character, huh? Avenatti was leading an incredible double life. During the day, he'd appear on television making principled stands against people he considered to be crooked politicians, and then he'd go back to his office and steal from a paraplegic. He would spend the afternoon playing the role of hero soldier and then go back to his office and direct his employees to obstruct an IRS investigation into his finances. The press was right. Avenatti was ruthless. What they didn't realize is that he was a ruthless thief. Avenatti ended up filing 3 lawsuits on behalf of Stormy Daniels, one seeking to nullify that non-disclosure agreement, one claiming that Trump's lawyer Michael Cohen conspired with the president to keep her quiet, and the last accused Trump of defaming Daniels in some of his tweets. Avenatti's legal maneuvers were not successful. One particularly painful outcome for Stormy came in October of 2018. A federal judge tossed the defamation suit that Avenatti filed against Trump. The court ruled that the president's tweet, which contained the alleged defamatory remarks, well, that was apparently considered to be opinion, and that's not actionable. To add insult to injury, the court required Stormy Daniels to pay Trump's legal bills. Stormy Daniels might not have been doing well on the legal front, but she had something else going for her. She still had a nice payday coming. And that's because she signed an $800,000 contract to write a book called Full Disclosure for St. Martin's Press. Stormy's literary agent was preparing to send her the first installment of her advance from the publishing company. Just before she sent the money, the agent got a letter from Stormy telling her to send the money to Stormy's lawyer, Michael Avenatti. What the agent didn't know is that the letter was fraudulent. Avenatti fabricated a letter, forged Stormy Daniels' signature on it, and then sent it to the agent, directing the agent to pay the money to Avenatti's bank account. When he got the first $148,000 installment, he immediately spent it on his own personal and business expenses. When Stormy pressed Avenatti on why she hadn't received her money, the lawyer lied and told her that the publisher didn't make the payment. Daniels threatened to go directly to her publisher about the missing payment, so Avenatti had to cover his tracks. He went out, got a personal loan for $148,000, and gave that money to Daniels so she wouldn't realize that he had previously taken and used her advance. When the next $148,000 payment was made, Avenatti stole that too. Daniels repeatedly asked Avenatti about that second payment, and the lawyer just continued to lie, again claiming that it was never made. He said that he was fighting to get that payment from the publisher on Stormy's behalf. That deception went on for months. And during that time, Avenatti spent Stormy Daniels' money on his law firm payroll, plane tickets, restaurants, and a $3,900 monthly lease for a Ferrari. Stormy had not yet found out about Avenatti's theft, but she was disappointed with him. She claimed that Avenatti filed the defamation suit without her consent and that he repeatedly ignored her requests for information. So she dumped him. Avenatti was truly nearing the end at this point. The money he stole from Stormy Daniels wasn't nearly enough to keep the pyramid scheme afloat. He was running out of money, and it started to affect his ability to pay other clients. For example, Avenatti was forced to stop making payments to Alexis Gardner, the ex-girlfriend of that basketball player. He told her that the ball player had stopped complying with the settlement agreement. To buy him some more time, though, Avenatti told his client that he'd work on getting her those missing payments. Just sit tight, he told her, and I'll get them. And then his disabled client, Jeffrey Johnson, that caused a real headache for Avenatti. Johnson's disability payments were about to run out. He needed to get information to the Social Security Administration to continue those benefits. The problem was that if Avenatti gave Johnson the information that he needed, it would have ended up disclosing Avenatti's embezzlement. So instead of giving Johnson the information he needed to send to the Social Security Administration, Avenatti told his client that he, the lawyer, would send it in for Johnson. And then he never sent it. In February of 2019, Johnson's Social Security disability benefits were cut off. When the calendar changed to 2019, Michael Avenatti must have been tapped out. He must have been out of money. It seemed like there was no money left and no clients left to steal from. But then there was one more. And luckily for Michael Avenatti, this last client would have a dispute with the biggest fish he'd ever tried to spear. Gary Franklin coached an AAU amateur youth basketball team in California. Gary Franklin also happened to be angry. He was angry because the sponsor of his team decided not to renew their $72,000 sponsorship. It made sense that he would be angry when you consider that that kind of money was a drop in the bucket for the sponsor. After all, the sponsor was the athletic shoe powerhouse, Nike. What made Franklin even more angry is the other bad stuff he alleged that Nike did. Franklin claimed that Nike forced him into making inappropriate financial arrangements with certain college athletes. To get justice, Franklin wanted to sue, so he hired Michael Avenatti. When he took the case, Avenatti could have been thinking about vindicating his client. He could have been thinking about recovering the $1.5 million in damages that his client believed he was owed. But it doesn't look like he was actually thinking any of that. Michael Avenatti was thinking of himself. Avenatti must have believed that this was the opportunity for him to get out from under the financial mess he'd made. This was not going to be about trying to settle his client's case for $1.5 million. No, this was a bailout. Avenatti must have realized that Nike had the financial wherewithal to wash away all of Avenatti's misdeeds. Think about it. If he could get Nike to pay him some big money, he could essentially cover up the entire pyramid scheme and walk away scot-free. It would be an incredible result. The problem is that an incredible result would require a bold move. And bold moves can sometimes piss people off. On March 19, 2019, Avenatti met with representatives of Nike in New York City. Avenatti claimed that Franklin had been coerced by Nike executives to funnel secret payments to elite amateur players and that he was forced to submit bogus invoices to Nike to cover it all up. But Avenatti didn't simply make the allegations that Nike was liable for damages. He outright threatened them. He told Nike that if the company didn't pay up, he would expose them to the public in a very painful way. He'd hit them where it hurts, in their stock price. Avenatti threatened to hold a press conference on the eve of Nike's quarterly earnings call. At that press conference, he said he'd allege misconduct by Nike employees, and oh, by the way, that press conference would coincide with the start of March Madness, the college basketball tournament. That would ensure that Avenatti's allegations would be at the top of the news cycle. But Avenatti told Nike that there was a way to avoid all of that messiness. He explained that what they really ought to do is conduct an investigation into those allegations. Yeah. Get to the bottom of the bad conduct that his client was alleging. Hire a lawyer to figure all this out. And the specific lawyer they should hire to conduct that investigation was Michael Avenatti. Avenatti told him, of course, that Nike would have to pay Avenatti's legal bill for those services, and the cost of those legal services would be around $20 million. But Avenatti said, listen, I understand that you might not want to go that route. He told Nike that an investigation was going to be a big ordeal, right? So there was another way to avoid the sure-to-be damaging press conference that he was going to hold. Nike could buy Avenatti's silence for a cool $22 million. When the call ended, Nike officials thought about it for a little while. And then they called Avenatti back. They explained that they wanted to talk more. Could they set up a call for tomorrow? Avenatti must have been absolutely giddy. He must have believed that he had Nike by the balls. Think about it. They reached out to arrange a follow-up call for the next day. His payday was within his grasp. The amount of money he could suck out of Nike could solve all of his problems. He must have realized that that phone call the next day was his critical moment. He had within his grasp a company large enough to pay him the kind of money that could get him completely out of his jam. He wasn't going to get another chance to bail himself out of his pyramid scheme. What he didn't know is that the next day's call was a setup. When Avenatti made the $20 million demand, Nike thought that it was a shakedown, and they called the FBI. It seems that the FBI thought it was a shakedown too. So Nike and the feds decided to get Avenatti on the phone the next day and secretly record the call. The next day on the phone call, Avenatti threw his Hail Mary. He got angry and he shouted, "I'm not fucking around with this, and I'm not continuing to play games." He repeated his threat from the day before. He said, "I'll proceed with my press conference tomorrow." And he explained that if he went through with it, the damage to their stock price would be immense. He said, "I'll take $10 billion off your market cap. I'm not fucking around." When the call was over, Nike and the FBI took the information to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. They launched a joint investigation. They arranged to have Avenatti meet with Nike reps again the following day, and this time the meeting would be recorded by both audio and video. At that meeting, Avenatti repeated his demands. But Nike lawyers told Avenatti that his demands were unreasonable. They explained that paying $20 million for an investigation is a crazy amount, and it was bound to attract attention. Avenatti responded by reminding the lawyers that he was in the driver's seat. And if they didn't give him what he wanted, he was going to hold that press conference and it would wreak havoc on them in the financial markets. Avenatti told them that they had 4 days to make a decision. If the deal wasn't in writing by Monday, March 25th, he was going forward and holding that press conference. He said, if this is not papered by Monday, we are done. And the deadline was serious. He said, I don't want to hear that somebody's on a bike trip. I don't want to hear that somebody's grandmother passed away. I don't want to hear that the dog ate my homework. I don't want to hear any of it. When March 25th came and Avenatti didn't get his agreement, he took to the airwaves. Avenatti tweeted to his 860,000 followers. He said, tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we will be holding a press conference to disclose a major high school and college basketball scandal perpetrated by Nike that we have uncovered. This criminal conduct reaches the highest level of Nike and involves some of the biggest names in college basketball. Nike's stock tanked. And while the price eventually recovered by the end of the day, Avenatti did not. Michael Avenatti was arrested and charged with extortion. After posting bail, Avenatti defiantly told the press that he will never stop fighting that good fight and that he was highly confident he would be fully exonerated. He was not. Far from it, the Nike arrest was merely the first of the dominoes to fall. Once he got arrested, everyone started to look harder at everything he'd done. People he defrauded popped up and started to ask questions, and ultimately everything was revealed. Eventually, he was tried and convicted of extorting Nike. 2 years later, he was convicted of stealing nearly $300,000 from Stormy Daniels. And in December of 2022, Avenatti was sentenced to an additional 14 years for stealing millions of dollars from other clients. His total prison time was 19 years. In the end, the sentiment of those he defrauded was probably best expressed by his paraplegic client, Jeffrey Johnson. At Avenatti's sentencing, he said, I'd like to forgive Michael. I really would. But at this time, there are consequences for one's actions. He said, Michael Avenatti really broke me. I read recently that Avenatti appealed his sentence and they apparently shaved off some of the time that he has to serve, but he still went to jail for an awful long time. And as far as his victims are concerned, I wish I had a better ending for you, but I don't. He was ordered to pay a truckload of money in restitution, but he doesn't have it, and they're probably not ever going to be made whole. And I think that's what makes this case so incredibly fascinating. I really don't think a whole lot of people knew that was going on during that whole saga with Stormy Daniels. Well, I hope you enjoyed the program. I hope you'll go rate us and give us some stars. I'd really appreciate it. And keep a lookout for the next episode of the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast.